Okay, so I'm Dave Lowe, and you are listening to the Scene World podcast.
It is the Scene World podcast. My name is AJ. Joerg is right there.
Hello, guys.
In a minute,
our last podcast for this year. Oh my god!
Yeah, this is. I suppose this is our Christmas spectacular, Christmas and New Year's spectacular, and Hanukkah as well. I believe starts on the 25th. So it's our Christmas, New Year's, and Hanukkah spectacular.
Right.
So drop a ball, light your tree, spin a dreidel. In a minute, we're going to be talking to Jens Schoenfeld from Individual Computers. He's the guy behind the C64 Reloaded and the guy behind the new cases that should be coming out soon and a butt ton of other stuff. I've ordered stuff from Individual Computers and they make a boatload of things and it's pretty awesome. So in a minute, we'll be talking to him and we'll be discussing some of the things that are in the pipeline and some of the things that have been done in the past. Before that, we've got a couple of pieces of news. Not too many because we just did a podcast like a week ago, and not too much has gone on since then. But we got some things, so I'll let you start that one off.
Okay. Well, I did a review of Terminal's Game Boy album a while ago that I bought on Gamescom, and now there is something new in town. It seems to be pretty classic nowadays. There is an Nes Music Cart. It's called A Winner Is You, and you can get it from USB Retro, or Retro USB better.
One of those things. One of those sites you can get it from.
Yes.
Just keep typing random letters until you get to the website.
Yeah, so it's retrousb.com, and the thing is, it's a digitized album, so it's pioneering stuff, because that has never been done before. It's unique hardware that's in the cart, and it's working on an original NES.
Cool.
That's really awesome, yeah. And you can get it for $45. That's pretty neat.
Yes.
And there's even a video along with it, and we will put that in the description. Yeah,
that'll be done.
Where the guy talks about the technical marvelous. Though that's really great.
Cool.
Right. So I got it. I'm looking forward to it, and if I like it good enough, maybe I even do a review about it. Let's see.
Nice.
Right. So it's interesting, because, Nintendo is known for, being very skeptical about stuff and suing people or wanting people that do Let's Plays on YouTube to actually share the revenue with them, On the other hand, they officially give permission to release stuff like Terminal's Game Boy album or this NES album. That's pretty unique. And from what I know, you get the permission. Of course, you cannot use the original casing that says Nintendo or Game Boy.
Right.
And you also have to write, this is not an official Nintendo product, but it's pretty great that Nintendo is allowing that officially and not going after people.
I see a lot of companies embracing kind of the retro bit because it's popular and it's getting more popular as we go along, and so it only makes sense to embrace that as part of your business plan going forward.
Of course, I understand that Nintendo wants people to write on it like it's not an official Nintendo product.
Well, yeah, absolutely. They were Nintendo was always very very strict. Everything had to be an official Nintendo product. Every game had to be officially licensed. There were a couple that weren't, but they were always weird.
You mean from Tengen? Yeah.
Well,
I really like.
I think Bible games weren't. If you ever got like a Nintendo game in like a baby blue case or some weird thing, you always knew it was like, oh, this is some odd bootleg or unlicensed thing.
Well, I really like the Tengen stuff.
Yeah.
Or Ultra, which actually was an official name for Konami,
Yeah.
to release stuff in Europe.
Yeah, and it works too because
without permission.
Yeah, well, yeah,
So, yeah.
But it also works, and I think part of that was because they were trying to, because of the video game crash, where the market was so saturated with these games, and a lot of them sucked, and a lot of them, some were good, but a lot of them sucked. A lot of them were just kind of half-assed, thrown out there to make some money. By having this tighter control over it, they could help ensure that their video game library, while some Nintendo games did suck, the vast majority didn't suck that bad. So,
yeah,
I think it helped. It helped prevent another crash that way because not everybody was able to make an officially licensed Nintendo game.
We actually covered this in an interview with David Crane, who said he was single-handed responsible for the video game crash.
Yeah.
I don't remember which issue. I think it was 18 or something. But we will put it in the description as always, so you can download it or watch it online via the web browser.
Yep.
Just to mention that again. So, So, and we even spoke about that with Joe Lewandowski, who did the Nintendo DAC. Atari. Yeah, I got confused. Nintendo, Atari stuff.
Yeah, it's all the same.
Nintendo, and Konami, Atari, Tension.
It's all the same stuff.
Yeah, And yes, and in the same issue where I interviewed David Crane, I also did an interview with Chris Criggs, who was the music major of Epix, summer games like
I know summer games.
Yeah, or California games. Yay.
Yeah.
He also did the sound effects for Maniac Mansion, Zack McCracken, and for the Hollywood movie Judge Dredd.
Ah, there you go. There you go.
I'm the law.
Yeah.
So pretty great guy. So if you want to have more background about that, we will link to our other resources.
Yes.
So another news, by the way, is, and we spoke to them a couple of times in our Career of Scene World, Frederick Schreiber from 3D Realms and Interceptor actually announced on Kickstarter today that they started shipping rewards of Red Rogers, which is the successor of Commander Keen, to those who don't remember. And that means I'm getting my box edition. Hey, I'm really looking forward to that. Maybe even before Christmas, as they are shipping from Denmark, as far as I know. Great, man. Man, you are marvelous. Great. So, speaking about resources, there's a new thing. We noted that people didn't like to link to click on Bitly, Google, or t.co links. So now we got our own short link app, and that's scene.world, and then / and then the short link. So that means from now on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google Plus, and all the other platforms we will put short links in. That means you can copy them without breaking them, because Facebook, when the link is too long, it's replaced by dots and you cannot copy and paste it anymore.
Right.
Or if you go over 15 chars on Twitter, it's actually removed from your 160 chars. That's pretty bad. So now we have scene.world. So that's pretty cool. That means now when you click on that link, it's leading to our homepage. It's an official link.
Yes. Cool. Very nice.
Yes. That's pretty cool. What else? Well, last time we plugged C64 assembler tutorials. And I think we also should plug the one that's called 64bytes.com, because that's really professional.
Yeah.
I mean, you get regularly tutorial videos. You get access to internal Facebook groups with pro composers and coders and stuff. So it's pretty neat. You know,
Yeah.
I'm still trying to find a reason to learn assembler next year. So
Well,
maybe
you know,
that's one of
like-
the things I should do.
Like Jen said in the interview, in the future, you know, did you know how to read and write, right? And you weren't planning to do that for professionally, so you might as well know how to do this too.
Then I
And
can.
I totally butchered
this
that
magazine.
phrase. I totally wrecked that phrase, but you know what? I don't care. That's not at all how it was said, but
Who cares?
Yeah.
You can fast forward and listen to it
Yeah.
yourself.
you know,
Yeah.
well, interesting, a fun thing. Whilst we were doing that interview, normally, Joerg comes to these things prepared. I don't, and so I spend a lot of time, usually like looking things up as we're talking, and you know, looking up things that I can talk about. And a lot of times you'll hear my mouse. My mouse is loud, and you'll hear throughout the thing as I'm looking at stuff. And I didn't do that last time. I threw the mouse out the window and I used the trackpad because it was easier and it was quieter. But as we were talking about products, and I was looking online for products, and during the podcast, I found an actual Commodore 1351 mouse, proportional mouse, for $13.
Wow.
And so during the interview, there's no place where I say it or anything, but during the interview, I made a purchase on eBay.
Okay.
So sometimes these things. Sometimes I'm looking up good questions. Sometimes I'm just finding things on eBay.
So now you can officially use our magazine with
Yes,
the 1351
I've
mouse.
been using for drawing and stuff. I've been using this stupid Amiga mouse that is. It works with certain things, but you got to unplug it every time you do anything with the keyboard because I don't know what this thing does to the keyboard, but every button is wrong, and it's like the computer's on crack when you plug this thing in. But,
which is a good thing to lead to the other thing. You know, on our review video of Kevin Castiles from the C64 Reloaded, and we mentioned that like 2 podcasts ago, people asked us questions like, can I do shit with the computer without breaking it? Can I unplug, replug everything without breaking it?
Mhm.
So, will the Messiah be fixed? Will Mayhem in Monsterland always work? Because it doesn't work on the current C64 Reloaded. So we ask him all the questions our community, our readers, our watchers, our listeners ask on the YouTube video.
Yep.
So now you no longer have to ask us. You just listen to this podcast and you get all the answers you ever wanted to know about the C64 Reloaded Mark II that's coming up next year. Oh my God!
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really happy that finally I got all the questions out. So I will put a short link. And I will pin it because I saw that's a new feature on YouTube. I will pin it to the top of the comment section of that review video so people don't ask us such silly questions anymore.
Feel free to continue asking us questions, but
you know,
bear in mind that some of them may have already been answered.
It's like, can I do that? It's breaking. And then like, why did it break? Schoenfeld said it wouldn't break, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm afraid of.
And if you have specific questions, never ask me because I have no idea.
Yeah. So yeah. One interesting thing is there will be no PLR socket. So because but the reason why listen to that in the interview.
Yeah.
Well,
you know what, let's get straight to the interview. We don't have too much news to get through, so let's hit that and people can hear the fun questions and all that stuff and yeah.
Great.
All right.
I would support that. Do that.
Okay.
So thanks for taking the time, Jens. Welcome to the podcast, I would say.
Thanks.
All right. So we talk today on the grounds of your plan to re-release the C64 Reloaded and the new cases for the C64. And but first, let's talk a bit about how did you actually get in touch with the Commodore 64 and so on? How did your history with that company and so on? How did it start all together?
Okay. Yeah, I actually started off with computers when I was in 4th grade, and my cousin got rid of his Sinclair ZX81. I played around with it for quite some time, and then I saw a Commodore 64 at a friend's place. His dad brought it home from work over the weekend, and that was when I knew, okay, the Sinclair has lost. I just had to have that thing, and I pestered my dad to buy me one for my birthday, and then in summer, just before I got into 5th grade, I got my Commodore 64, and yeah, that was the start of it all. And I was always a little hardware affected, playing around with Fischertechnik and trying to control my Fischertechnik with the Commodore 64. I broke it quite a few times, and then my mom at some point refused to pay for the repair. And so I had to learn how to repair the C64 myself, because I couldn't just be without. And that's how I got deeper and deeper into the hardware. And yeah, today I can say I pretty much understand how the computer works.
So you are kind of self-taught.
Yeah, that's true for most of the knowledge I have around Commodore computers. Of course, I got a little bit of knowledge studying electrical engineering at the University of Aachen, and yeah, well, combining that knowledge is what I do on a regular basis. The research we do for the Chameleon project, for example. Then, of course, combined with electrical engineering and computer science knowledge, that's really, really interesting. So you might not only call it self-teaching, but also actual research, because there are details of the machine that are just not documented at all. So, well, you could even go further and call it kind of digital archaeology, because we are trying to find out how they did stuff back then, and that's pretty much what an archaeologist is doing.
And how did you actually go to this step and say, I make my own company? I mean, Individual Computers is doing a lot of accessories for the Amiga and the C64. You are doing a lot since a long time. I mean, I personally know you since 17 years or something. So you're doing it for a long time now. And how did you actually get the idea to say, I do my own company and I make my living out of retro computers?
It was also kind of not exactly planned, but it just turned out to be that way. In 1994, when I already finished school, I did not yet start my studies at the University of Aachen. A few friends from Neon Games approached me and asked, well, can you do a special kind of hardware? Back then it was about using Amiga 1200s for tracking movements just from video cameras. And I said, yeah, sure, I can try to do the hardware. And we set up a little contract. I started doing the thing, and that's when they've been asking me, well, we can't employ you, but of course we can pay you. So you need to write us an invoice, and that's a legal step that you do in Germany. Before you can write invoices, official invoices, you have to register a business. And I did that for that specific contract in 1994. And I just never canceled the business. I just had this this registration and never thought about releasing it. I don't know what the English word is. Das Gewerbe wieder abmelden. Jörg, can you help me out here?
Well,
unregister the business, maybe.
Yes,
so I never unregistered the business, and then, of course, quite a few years later, in 2006, I founded the Individual Computers GmbH. That's the German version of a limited liability company. And it was only then when I really started taking full-time employees and really kind of planning to stay in retro computing. Until then, it was really in parallel to my studying, and I just happened to make some money out of it. It was plus minus zero during that time, and I only turned it really into a grown-up business starting 2006. And by then it was already clear that neither the Commodore 64 nor the Amiga will take over world domination and beat Microsoft or Apple or whatever. So it was absolutely clear that these are hobby machines, very, very nice hobby machines, and all this all this kind of pressure and persons that really wanted the Amiga to be the office computer and the computer that that should be in everybody's home and that should do office work for just everyone, and beat Windows or Apple quantity-wise. All these thoughts were already taken out by that time, and I was sure retro computing, it's a hobby, a very nice hobby, and more and more people start looking into it and really see that computing can't be only frustration because some driver doesn't work or whatever, but it can be really fun. And that's really how I approach the business. I try to solve the problems that people have maybe entering the hobby, that somebody might have, problems that someone might have firing up the machine after a few decades and trying to make a connection to the modern world, like downloading software and transferring it to the machine. And really try to lower the frustration level and to lower the hurdles of getting into it. And you might want to say it's an attempt of lowering the hurdle to having fun with a computer.
And as a result of this, you got the idea to make the C64 Reloaded, which I think was like a limited run. You didn't do it unlimited. And you did
Unlimited wasn't an option by then, and of course the Commodore 64 Reloaded, or the units that I sold were not Commodore 64 Reloaded. Those were C64 Reloaded. I didn't have the Commodore label by then. Those weren't exactly planned. I just started calling chip brokers out there and asking, well, can you get MOS or CSG chips? CSG stands for Commodore Semiconductor Group. And I just wanted to get all the chips that start with 65 something or 85 something, because those are the ones that, or 83 something, those are the ones that are being used in the Amiga. And I was just after Amiga chipsets. I knew that the AGA chipsets that were left over after the FCOM bankruptcy, they had to be somewhere, and so I started digging around. I found them. But by pure coincidence, I also found a couple of hundred C64 chipsets. And I thought, well, C64 is a simple machine, and before I start on the Amiga, I'm going to do the simple machine first, for starters, for a warm-up, you know. And, of course, if whenever you think something is easy, it turns out to be much harder than it looks from the outside. And it turned out to be quite a long development, and until it was really ready for mass production, a few more months than I expected have passed. And then, of course, to my surprise, so many people were interested in it that the website broke down on the first day when I announced that sales would start. And I guess the rest of the story is pretty much known, and I still didn't get around to making the Amiga Reloaded yet, which, by the way, will not be called Amiga Reloaded because I can't use the name Amiga. The rights to the name Amiga remain with a company that obviously doesn't want to do licensing contracts that are not silly by default, and so I will call it Commodore A1200 Reloaded, and I guess that's an even better name. But before that, now I have the license to using the Commodore name, and I will of course make the C64 Reloaded Mark II, or in this case Commodore 64 Reloaded Mark II, and that will be available in two different versions. One using the real chips that were available back then, and but unfortunately I don't have the chipset, so I'm going to have to sell it with empty ZIF sockets, hoping that nobody is going to harvest chips from a working Commodore 64. This is a call for all you guys out there. If you have a defective C64, okay, use the chips, but if it's a working C64, that's a classic machine. Leave it as is. I really don't want anybody to harvest chips off working machines. So let's call the C64 Reloaded Mark II something purely for restoration. So if you have a defective board that you can't repair, although you have already replaced all the chips, and you still can't get it to work, then the C64 Reloaded Mark II is what you've been looking for. And if you really want a new machine, like the Commodore 64 back in the days, in the form factor of the Commodore 64, but with modern chips in there, then the FPGA-based version of the C64 Reloaded is what I would recommend to get. And that is all planned for 2017. It's actually the next project I'm going to start is the C64 Reloaded mainboard with real chips. And after that, it's going to be FPGA-based and really looking into the next decade or two of delivering C64s without the pains of sourcing original chips.
Now, is there a way to kind of do hybrid where you can have some FPGA but then some original components?
Yes, of course, that's possible, but I think this really doesn't make sense for most of the C64 chips. It would only make sense for the SID chip, because the SID is still something that is quite hard to emulate, especially the filters. The SID chip in itself is a hybrid between digital and analog circuits, and that is something that is hard to do on an FPGA. Actually, the FPGA would have to emulate the behavior of the analog side. It would have to calculate the behavior of the analog side, and therefore quite a lot of FPGA space is required. We do have a nice SID implementation in the Chameleon core already, but that's not... it's not perfect. So the only chip that I would really, the only original chip that I would accept next to the FPGA would be a SID chip, and maybe I will really add a socket. I can't say what the concept will be. I will probably have to talk this through, especially with the FPGA developer that has been doing the Chameleon for a long time now with Peter Wendrich. In the end, he's going to be the one to say yes or no, I'm going to do it or not, because one of the main things I try to keep up in with my employees is a good motivation, and I think just saying, okay, do it this way, do it that way, just because I want it like that, that's not good for motivation. I really want my employees to love what they do, and this can only be the case if they also accept the concept. So I'm not the only only person in this company making the decisions, because of course I could be, because I'm the owner, I'm the CEO, but I do this. I definitely do this together with my employees, and that's not going to change in the future, because I can be wrong, and I try to minimize the possibility of making the wrong decision by making these decisions together with my employees.
That reminds me a bit of Jack Tramiel and his Jack Attack, you know? He making decisions with an iron fist, and you could be like Jens Attack, so from the name it would fit, but of course maybe it's better to include your employees with the decisions, of course.
Yeah, absolutely, because I just might be maybe running into the totally wrong direction, and in the end, my employees might be walking off just because they think, well, Jens is a moron. This is not a working product, and so yeah, it's of course working for individual computers also must be fun. That's part of the motivation. If you love what you do it right. If you don't love what you do, if you just execute the job to be able to pay your invoices, then at some point it's that you can feel it in the products, and I don't want to introduce that with individual computers. As fun as it should be using retro computers, the same fun should it be to develop for retro computers.
Right. So seeing that you say there will be two versions, and I probably think you also saw that there is a competitor product called the D64 coming out next year. That was actually started by the guy who invented kind of the concept of the DTV.
Yeah, well, you call it competitor, but I don't really see it as a competitor. If you read the campaign and if you take a closer look at what he's offering, then it is just it's just an emulation platform. I think he's using some kind of ARM system on a chip, and that's just emulation in a different form factor. You might as well buy a cheap PC and install Vice on it. And since he's pretty open about using emulation, but not open about what kind of emulation, it might even be a GPL violation, but I think he's not out yet with the product, so I don't want to jump to conclusions too soon. The main thing, the most important thing that he has been publishing in his campaign is that he said it would be way too expensive and way too much work to actually put the C64 and the required peripherals onto a chip and make the product that he is planning using a real chip. So he's essentially saying what individual computers has been doing these past 8 years with a Chameleon is way too expensive for him, and he won't bother to go to these lengths. Well, the only thing I can say is thank you, because I can't have any better advertising. He says it's impossible for him to achieve what we have already achieved.
Yeah, let's talk about the Chameleon. What? Explain that a little bit to the people who might not know what that is.
Yeah, the Chameleon started off as a simple idea for a cartridge that plugs into the expansion port of the Commodore 64, and I wanted it to be a VGA adapter for the C64. We started in 2006, was it? Yeah, it must have been. No, 2008, I'm sorry, 2008. The concept was a little earlier, but the first real product came out in 2008, and the idea back then was to have a VGA adapter. CRT monitors, tubes were dying on a regular basis, and flat screens were just coming up, not just coming up, but getting cheap enough for everybody to afford. And the original monitors for the C64, they were dying on a regular basis, and I just wanted to have something for the C64 to adapt its video output to VGA. And the concept I wanted, it was to have it external. I wanted it completely digital, so it had to be on the expansion port. Because the monitor signal that comes out of the C64 is analog, and therefore I just didn't want to didn't want to tap that and convert that to digital when I have the possibility of gathering the picture data on it in a digital way. This turned out to be rather complicated. But in essence, it worked. And after we completed all the work, it turned out it was not possible without emulating the processor externally. So in essence, we replicated part of the C64 in the external cartridge in order to replicate the picture. Mm-hmm. And before we knew it, the whole cartridge turned not only into a C64, but into a C64 with peripherals like a 1541 floppy drive, fully emulated, and you can even switch on two of these, because one is not enough, you know. It's Commodore, you can always expand. And the cartridge has one property that many people may not like, because expanding is what many of these hobbyists really like to do. The Chameleon cannot be used in cartridge port expanders. It must be connected directly to the computer. And in order to ease the pain of not having any other cartridge that you can operate together with the Chameleon, we just started implementing many cartridges, if not all the important cartridges, into the Chameleon as well. So you can now switch on and off certain expansions that you always wanted to have in your C64. Like the RAM expansion units from Commodore, like GeoRAM, certain freezers. We were emulating Action Replay, Nordic Replay. Super Snapshot is one of, I think Super Snapshot is very popular in North America, isn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, then Epic's Fast Load is one of the things, and the list is really huge. I suggest just looking up in our wiki, because it's like 40 cartridges that you can choose from, and then variants with different ROM versions. That makes a couple of hundred cartridges that you can choose from, without ever touching another cartridge at any time, because it's all in the cartridge. Then, of course, having the CPU external gave us the possibility of accelerating the C64. So you can even use GEOS at lightning speed. Not quite as fast as the Super CPU, but definitely way faster than any original, because we're reaching a factor of 16 to 18 compared to the real C64, with quite a few clever mechanisms of slowing down whenever it's required for compatibility. So a lot of software that has been out there all these years that was barely usable back then because the Commodore 64 just didn't have enough CPU power, all of a sudden becomes usable. Like, for example, the PageFox cartridge that was made by a German company. And back then it was
Scantronic, I think, was the name.
Scantronic, that's the name of the company, correct. I actually had one of the guys on the phone and asked him for permission to publish his work back then, and he said, "Well, yeah, sure, I'm not interested in this stuff anymore." And so now everybody can use PageFox, which really marked a milestone in desktop publishing back then. And I think PageFox was published at a time when the Amiga was already out, and the C64 could really compete with other DTP programs on the Amiga back then. And seeing today that a slightly accelerated version of it is really nice to use, really shows you the quality of this kind of software. And it's just that the C64 wasn't fast enough back then. But a very nice demonstration of the power of 8-bit. So in summary, the Chameleon is really anything you always wanted to expand your C64 with, and just a tiny bit more, because I think an infrared remote control was never available for the C64, right?
Right. I don't believe so. And it actually emulates more than just the 64, right?
Yeah, it's practically an FPGA-based computer. So not just the C64 is possible, but there is also a port of Minimig. Then there's an Italian guy who made a Sinclair Spectrum core, so you can really use Sinclair Spectrum software. We have made a VIC-20 core and really expanded a lot on it, because we actually used the VIC-20 core to test the VIA chips, which are also used in the 1541 drive. And in order to reach cycle exact operation, we just had to investigate how the real 6522 VIA chips work. So we wrote test programs, ran them on a real VIC-20, ran them on our emulation, and that turned out to be, or today the VIC-20 core that we have, it's not one of the officially supported cores. Only the C64 core is really supported, but the VIC-20 core really works nicely. There is an Atari 2600 core, and I think somebody even made an Atari 800. I really have to look it up myself now. Because myself, I'm really only using the Chameleon in its initial core in the C64 version.
Right.
But you're not stopping there. You're also planning, I've read, to use the molds that were discovered from Dallas Moore in Texas and making new 64 cases, actually.
That's right. Last year in December, I contacted Dallas Moore and asked him if he would be willing to sell the molds. He has used them in a Kickstarter he has found them, and I really have to say that it was by pure coincidence, and he's not a retro computer person at this point, but he was attentive enough to see that those pieces of steel that were offered to him, because he is his profession is a liquidator, and these molds were offered to him practically as scrap metal, and he has just seen a few sample plastic parts that were bundled with it and thought, well, I know this. I've seen this shape before, and then he quickly discovered, okay, this must be the original molds for making C64 cases, and that's how he really saved these molds from being turned into scrap metal. So he made the very first cases off of these, and since he is a liquidator and he doesn't have any retro computing business, he after this project was finished, he could sell them to me. Originally, the Return magazine from Germany, they had the right of first refusal, is I think what you call it, because they also did something for Dallas, but Return magazine gave that right to me, so I could buy these molds and now we're doing this project together. The designer of the return magazine has created some really, really nice color combinations for making new C64 cases, and I have found a company that can do all the required repairs and updates to the molds. I transferred these molds to Germany using sea freight. That took, I think, something around 8 weeks in total, or was it 9, 10 weeks? I don't know. Sometime in February this year. The molds arrived, and ever since we've been doing repairs here, repairs there, samples here, samples there, adjusting colors and finding another dent in the mold that needed repair. And we probably won't make it until Christmas, but it's very likely that sometime around Christmas or in the first week of January, mass production can really start, because we've been on this project for really a long time, and it's now time to really say, well, a few dents in these molds must be accepted, and we can't have it totally perfect, and but at some point we need to come out with a product. So Thomas Koch, or Pixel Wizard is his handle I think he's using. He has created these extremely nice colors, colors that really have a relation to what's been made in the 80s. And the cases from Dallas Moore were just available in 3 colors that were never available before. I think it was just white, red, and blue.
And see-through, and there was a limited run of the original cream color, actually. But it was limited to Kickstarters.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I have red one. I have a red one, actually, in which I put my C64 Reloaded last Christmas.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I've seen a number of these cases equipped with C64 Reloaded, because everybody who has really been making a C64 from scratch with these components was obviously really, really proud. And I have my little private picture gallery here that shows all the different incarnations that you can build with different color cases, different keyboards that are available, because keyboard colors keyboard styles, there are also 3 of them from Commodore, the brown keyboard, then the white keyboard with print on top and front, and then the white keyboard with only print on top. And all these combinations with the different colors that were available from Dallas Moore. But to be honest, none of them really appeals to me, because these colors that he has offered, neither blue nor red is anything that Commodore has offered before. And what Thomas has designed with the colors for the return magazine is really something that has a relation to what Commodore has done. The original color of the breadbox, this brownish or light brown and dark brown keyboard, that is something that I'm really looking forward to having, because this C64C style case has never been available in this exact color, and I would expect that many breadbox cases that were drilled through for switches and lamps and whatnot will be used as donor units, especially for a keyboard. And this keyboard really only looks nice in the original breadbox color, and the C64C in breadbox color is something that was really missing. C64C in black, like the C16, for example, that was missing. Then, of course, the original C64C color, I think you called it beige, or really, there are numbers for production that can be used. I really don't know what the names for the colors are, but my personal favorite in these color combinations is the SX64 color scheme.
Yeah, mine too.
that's really adding value to the machine. It's taking the silverish metal plus really dark gray two-tone color, and applying that to the C64C, and that is really the dream machine. It's probably just those of us who have been using C64s back in the days. The SX64 was always kind of a dream machine, like everybody wanted to have it, but nobody could afford it, and of course everybody would recognize it from the special color combination.
Yeah.
And now we can really make our own color combination like this. This is I'm really looking forward to that.
I have one question about the C64 Reloaded, because a lot of our listeners and readers were asking that when our editor Kevin Castiles from Canada made a review video on YouTube about the Commodore Reloaded, and he figured out the Messiah cartridge wouldn't work, and that was a lot of turn down for many people, despite you could work around it with a user port reset button. But a lot of people were asking us if a new version of the Reloaded would fix that problem.
Yes, of course I will fix that. Like you already said, there is a workaround for the existing C64 Reloaded, and it is purely related to the reset signal, not acting exactly like on the original C64. I didn't bother to replicate that signal exactly like in the original C64, because I didn't expect any cartridge or any component that you would ever attach to the C64 to care. And the Messiah cartridge taught me different, and I will of course add this to the new design. Like I said, the new design with the real chips, that is something that will be delivered without the chips, unfortunately. So even the CR chips will be in ZIF sockets. And one nice surprise, one question that I got frequently, maybe you got it too, was the color of these ZIF sockets. The C64 Reloaded had them in light green, which I thought was a nice contrast to the black board, but many people have asked for black ZIF sockets because they wanted just everything black chips, black sockets, black board. And this is something I can confirm now. I have found a company that will make these ZIF sockets in black for me, and maybe this is enough of a reason for somebody who already owns a C64 Reloaded to buy a second one.
Yeah, well, interesting. I also think you shouldn't butcher original C64. I got mine from Uwe Peters, my set of chips, so they are still available if you know who to ask. So the question is, will you also offer the PLA, the Super PL version 3 with it, like in the past and so on? Because that's one of the chips that frequently breaks, and you made this Super PLR to replace it.
I will not even make a socket for the PLA, but I will put the PLA right onto the board, because I've had too many support cases, really just a few, but still too many support cases, because people have been using EEPROM PLAs and certain things, especially cartridges, didn't work right. And although I was mentioning it in the wiki, and everybody knows that I'm really not a fan of EEPROM-based PLAs, people, knew better and tried anyway and failed. So I will put a PLA replacement right on the board, and even fix the problem that that there is with the original Epix Fastload cartridge, which kind of uses an analog effect of the original PLA chip, which the Super PLA version 3 doesn't implement because it's a different logic family. So if I'm implementing a PLA into a modern 3.3 volt CPLD, then this property will be there, just like with the original PLA chip. And I will not have the problem of people stuffing in a PLA chip, so the wrong type of PLA chip. So this is going to make it easier for people, I hope. And maybe I can even add another surprise to it, but I haven't built a prototype yet, so I don't want to go into details of the actual board.
Yes, it's interesting. Another question people asked us often, but I always said, like, well, take care of your hardware, is like, can you plug in and remove the joystick without switching it off, and can I use the headphone plug without switching it off? Because I know the early Pred bin C64 didn't have a protector against shortcuts of the CIA chip, and actually I had a Pred bin once, a C64G, that was broken by constantly removing and plugging in the joysticks without being
Interestingly,
switched off.
now I've got a piece of software. It's Interpaint, and it lets you use one of the things that you can do. You can actually use an Amiga mouse with it, which I happen to have one. But because the Amiga mouse does weird things, every time you go to save something or go to use the disk menu, it says unplug the mouse, and then it's like plug the mouse back in. So it's telling you to do it while the machine is on.
Yeah, well, plugging and unplugging joysticks is not really a problem. What you're probably referring to is that if you get close to the joystick ports with your fingers, the chances of electrostatic discharge into the joystick ports are pretty high. And that is something that no CR chip will ever be able to stand. So any C64 is really in danger if you are completely charged and discharge yourself into the joystick port of a C64. It will most likely burn a CR chip. The C64 Reloaded has already added a lot of protection diodes, so-called clamping diodes, to protect the CR chips. In fact, I haven't had a single person reporting to me that he has burned a CR chip in his C64 Reloaded, but it is also, I really don't want to claim this as a design success, because I would expect that many of the C64 Reloaded customers are tech people who really know how to handle these delicate chips. And but still, I think it's good design practice to add protection diodes, clamping diodes on these signals, because they don't affect compatibility at all, but they give a certain level of protection. I don't even know if this human body model of discharging 2,000 volts into these ports, if the chips would really stand that. And to be honest, I wouldn't want to risk it either. So I will just keep these protection diodes and believe that these will improve the immunity of the machine towards electrostatic discharge. But I will definitely not promise anything, any level of protection. The schematics of the C64 Reloaded are open, so the type and location of these protection diodes is known, and every engineer can look at them. There are actually quite a few really hardware literate people on the Forum 64 who have reviewed the schematics and criticized a few spots and gave me thumbs up on many more spots of the schematics. And so I think getting this positive what kind of people they are, if they are really engineers or just hobbyists. But like I said, a lot of positive feedback on the way I have implemented things on the C64 Reloaded, and therefore, well, if it is good design practice and if it doesn't affect compatibility, I will definitely keep it in.
Well, I mean, one thing people often don't consider is even Commodore hardware themselves wasn't compatible to each other.
Yeah.
You could have some models that wouldn't run Mayhem and Monsterland. You would have some models that wouldn't run a certain demo. Even the Commodore 64 original revisions are not 100% compatible to all the software out.
Well, the fact that you mentioned Mayhem and Monsterland is probably gearing towards the VSP fix that I have added to the C64 Reloaded.
Exactly.
VSP, or let's first go to Mayhem and Monsterland. VSP is an effect that was first used by this game, Mayhem and Monsterland, to make extremely fast movements of the screen, in order without the need to copy large amounts of data within memory. So it allows you to do quick movements, like as required in an action video game, without too much programming. But like you said, it doesn't work on all the C64s, and this is related to a bug in the video chip, which wasn't 100% described up until a few years ago, when Tommy Lempinen from Sweden has pestered me over and over again to look into this and that, and he made logic analyzer shots, and when we met at one of the demo parties, the revision, one of the classic demo parties that's taking place every Easter, we came pretty close to figuring it out, and but in the end, I really have to give credit to Tommy Lempinen and LFT for figuring out what the VSP bug is all about, and then of course, being a hardware person myself, and also offering design services and hardware bug fixing services for other companies, I pretty quickly found out how to fix this, and added the VSP fix to the C64 Reloaded, and that will even be extended upon with the C64 Reloaded Mark II, because there are still some chip combinations that are not 100% debugged with the VSP fix of the C64 Reloaded.
Okay. Well, then I should try that, actually, because I didn't try running Mayhem and Monsterland on my machine yet.
You will most likely find that it works. It is one chip combination that hasn't been sold very often or hasn't been used very often, especially because most of the people prefer the 6569 instead of the 8565. And the 8565, I think revision 2 is the one that's affected, but I would have to look that up.
Great. So that means all your plans are for early 2017.
I can't really give too many promises because I've been working on closing and finishing many other projects. Like I've started a lot of projects for the Amiga while negotiating with Polabe about the Commodore license. And yes, these projects are all almost finished. The ACA 500 Plus is almost out the door. And therefore, yes, I can say that I will start designing or maybe even making a prototype of the Commodore 64 Reloaded Mark II in January. And once that is working and once the technical data is finalized, I will start taking pre-orders. And this time it's going to be even before the start of production, because there will be no limits this time because we don't have the limiting factor of original chips. So anybody who wants to order a board can order it. I won't be able to deliver right away because production hasn't started by then, but whenever I'm taking pre-orders, I think I have a track record of really delivering and keeping a production schedule. And I think over the past few years, or even, well, is it already a decade that I have introduced this very strict policy of really only taking money for something that I know exactly when I can deliver the item. It is, this is really something that the retro market, that makes the retro market a little bit funny, or maybe even attractive to criminals, because there have been quite a few projects in the retro, in this retro scene, both Amiga and C64 projects, where people have promised a lot of things and started taking orders, started taking money, and never delivered anything. I think, well, a few Super CPU customers are still waiting for their units. A few VGA converter unit customers are still waiting for their VGA 128. And then, of course, a number of Amiga projects, like Siamese, that started taking orders, started taking people's money, and never delivered. That is really something that has harmed the market and that has harmed the reputation of this very nice hobby. And therefore, I try to tell people, look closely and then look exactly who you give your money to.
Yeah, right. Which brings me to the question, as I said, reputation. Well, how about getting the license to use the name Commodore? Was that an issue for you? Because we know there are other companies around making smartphones under that name and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I had to ask this question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, using the name Commodore is, of course, a long-term wish of mine, and I frequently contacted the Commodore Corporation. This. I think their website is still defective, but email addresses are working for them. And the Commodore Corporation was bought by a company called Polabe. I am not sure whether they are in the process of moving to Luxembourg or if this move has already taken place, but when sometime in 2014, was it? No, 15. It must have been 15. Sometime in 2015, I contacted or sent yet another email to an address that I knew existed. But that actually didn't reach somebody from Commodore Corporation, but somebody within Polabe, because they already had control over the domain and over the emails. And that's when actual negotiations really started. And Polabe is, they really know what they have there. They want to do something with the Commodore brand, and their technical persons, they really want to see that somebody who is using the brand is not damaging it. So they won't accept rebranding Chinese imports, but they really want to see that there is some kind of development behind the products and some kind of quality control, really a company infrastructure behind it. They really turned my books up and down and demanded certain other things that I don't want to go into detail here.
Of course, yeah.
During the negotiations, I actually had a few orders, shipments, and support cases where I wasn't exactly sure if these were Polabe people just trying to see how I do support, because it was around the time when we discussed details of the contract on how support needs to be done and what minimum level of tech support there has to be for Commodore products. So as you can see, Polabe really takes care of the name. They really want to keep it in memory. The way that we experienced it when we were kids. I mean, to me, it is really a huge responsibility now delivering my own Commodore product, because as a kid, as a teenager, I grew up with Commodore, and it was almost sacred to me these machines with that logo on, and they really did what I wanted to, and it was something special. And now I think I have a responsibility not just towards towards my customers, but especially towards me, not to destroy this memory that we all have of Commodore.
Well, that means after the DTV there will be and finally a new Commodore 64 product under the real name.
Yes, of course. Like I said, not just the Commodore 64 Reloaded, but also with a board with an FPGA. And on top of that, of course, we talked about the cases, and the one thing missing to deliver complete machines is a keyboard. And there are quite a few plans to really bring the C64 into this century and to bring the fun back, not just with compatibility to the original machine, but also with a few more functions that might make it attractive as an everyday use machine, not as a replacement for a computer or for something, for a tablet or whatever we have in our households today, but in a field that is just not covered by these mobile phones or desktop computers today. We should talk about that when this concept is really finalized. There are a few ideas in there that are in the process of being checked for if they are patent worthy. That's why I don't want to talk about too many details here. But I think we can do our share to bring the glory back and to really say the C64 should be in everybody's household.
Now, see, this is kind of how I feel like if Commodore were to come back or were to if anyone were to use the name, this is where I would think it would be the best, rather than making cell phones or modern PCs in a breadbox case that happens to look like the old thing. You're never going to have a successful brand new modern machine Commodore, but to focus on what they're good at, which is the 8-bit systems and the Amigas and stuff like that, and to kind of, accept that kind of niche market, sort of almost like the Raspberry Pi does, where it's, it's a hobbyist thing, and they do great business. And this is how I would think that it would be the best way to bring Commodore back, really.
Yeah, that's exactly my intention. Joerg just mentioned that there is a company from, I think the persons are from Italy, and they registered a limited company in Great Britain. They are actually not allowed to use the Commodore brand, and at least to my knowledge.
Well, their argument is that because Commodore never made a cell phone, they're allowed to use the name because they're not infringing on anything that Commodore has ever done before. But as far as I know, they're still getting sued by about 95 people. So we don't know.
Okay, yeah, I really don't want to get in the middle of that because I consider making smartphones, making tablets, making current desktop computers with current Office-like applications. I consider that quote unquote Me Too business. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be in there.
Right.
There are companies that can do that. They can probably ship huge quantities of cell phones, tablets, whatever, and they might even benefit from Commodore, but those devices, they might benefit from the name Commodore, but they will never carry Commodore spirit. And this is something that I want to bring back. The Raspberry Pi is a nice example. You mentioned a hobbyist thing, and that's what I want to bring back into people's homes, like making programming a hobby and making it fun to use a computer. I mean, I call the C64 the most sympathetic blue screen you have ever seen. I mean, blue screen is what really drives you mad on a Windows machine, and it makes you smile on a Commodore 64. I mean, what more can you ask for?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's interesting, yeah. So, you will release this with the mind of having another hobbyist computer, and maybe bringing the fascination and the spirit of the Commodore 64 to nowadays generations of small kids, for example.
Well, it's a great way to get started with computers, because you have to learn how to make it do everything,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the most sympathetic thing about the C64 is its weakness. It's 1 megahertz, 64K, and you can still do so many things with it. But even if you consider this a learning machine, and you ask today's engineers, today's developers, anyone in this business will confirm that if somebody has programmed a C64 as a child, he will be able to program microcontrollers instantly. Mm-hmm. And this is really something that today's kids, even if they come freshly from the university, they didn't have a C64 when they were teenagers. So if some freshman comes from the university, just finished his studies, has a diploma in computer science, he will probably not be able to program a microcontroller like somebody who is 15 years older and who has programmed the C64 when he was a kid. Because somebody who has worked on the C64 and really used a BASIC that required lots and lots of pokes into the hardware, these people really have an idea of what it means to write a value into a hardware register. Many of these, freshmen coming from university, they don't really have a concept of how this all works. And
I had this conversation at my actual job the other day, because I fixed part of a website, and there was a guy in mid-20s or so, and he was like, "Wow, you know HTML?" And I'm like, "Fool, I know assembly language." It's a whole different world. People don't even know that stuff anymore.
Yeah, assembly language, and that's where it stops for many people. And it's already a huge step forward if that person in his 20s would have narrowed it down and asked for, assembly language for what processor?
Right.
But that is probably asking too much. And but I find that a pity, because yes, I think people should know about technology, not because they must be good developers or something, but a very, very simple thing. This is a strain of arguments that I'm taking from one of the tech talks I heard. I can't really name where the thought comes from, but the strain goes a little bit like this. First of all, do you know how to read and write? The average Joe will say, yes, of course. And, then next question, did you ever consider to write professionally? And most of the people will say no. And then, then why did you bother reading and writing, learning how to read and to write? And the general answer is, well, reading and writing makes everything so much easier, makes life so much easier. And therefore, it is a standard thing for everybody to learn how to read and to write. And I would really like to extend upon this, not just learn how to read and to write, but learn about technology. Because learning about technology is not just required for somebody who wants to work in the area, but just about everybody. So if you know about technology, just handling technical things which are all around us, everywhere, will be so much easier because you have a little idea about what's behind it. And so did you learn how to program is probably answered by many, many people as no, because I never wanted to do this as a profession. So, I think that's the wrong approach to things. I think everybody should really learn about technology. But like I said, I have to give credit to someone else for this train of thoughts. I will have to look it up. It was a TED Talk about an educational language that is music-based. That's what I still remember. But I'm happy to look this up and send the link to Joerg so he can he can add a reference to this TED Talk. It was a really good one. I hope everybody knows what TED Talks are.
Oh yes.
Okay, good. Just asking. Like I said, this is not my strain of thought, but I can really subscribe to that, and I would like to support it with my product and with the approach I am taking to the next generation C64.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that all the complaints of the original C64 Reloaded finally turn out into an even better version, because a lot of people said, like, this is not 100% compatible, this is not a real C64. So it turns out the Mark II will be exactly what the
as
customer
you said before,
wants.
Even the real 64s weren't all real 64s, because there was such a like slapped together kind of. Commodore was great in that. Most of their stuff was real, just thrown together.
Well, I mean, sorry. I just want to say, I was making an interview with David Haney, who worked on the C64 emulation mode, or the C64 mode for the 128.
Which I've just learned is not compatible with everything. In real life, I've learned this.
And I was just going to support the point from Jens that you can't get in the minds of all developers what kind of weird tricks they use of the hardware. So you cannot be 100% compatible in a sense.
Yes, you can be, but not by default, not in every mode of the machine, and of course not with the limited possibilities they had when they made the C128. I personally consider the C128 the best C64 emulator ever, but definitely not a C64. And what we've done with the Chameleon and with all the expansions that we've put in there is to give people the possibility to create most compatible configurations. And this is something that all the freaks out there truly like. They have a single machine, and at the push of a button, they can turn certain compatibility features on and off. And this is something that was just missing on the C128. It might have been possible. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe they just didn't put enough love in it because they were focusing too much on C128 and CPM modes. And we're just adding C64 mode in order to catch enough people who would say, okay, I want something more than a C64, but I want the whole software set of the C64. There are enough possibilities to add features, But in order to be compatible, you need these features to be switchable. I'm actually doing the same thing for the ACA 500 Plus. It is something. It's just an accelerator that you plug to the side of an Amiga 500. But then, if you are a little bit Amiga literate, then you might know that there have been plenty of versions for the Amiga 500. Starting off with 512K machine, Kickstart 1.2. Later on, they changed to Kickstart 1.3. Then at some point they changed to an ECS Agnes. Then they called it the A500 Plus, gave it 1 megabyte of memory and even a different Denise chip and all this kind of stuff.
True.
And this is all something that gave software developers a hard time, because it was harder and harder to really be compatible with each and every machine. And today, if people are returning to the Amiga, they know, okay, Amiga 500, that's what everybody had back then, so they buy something off eBay, and, well, it is something, yes. It is one of the machines that I've just listed. And what I'm trying to do with the ACA 500 Plus is to give people a possibility to create memory and Kickstart configurations depending on what the software requires. So, in a sense, it is possible, but you need to do that by choosing different modes. The ACA 500 Plus comes up with a menu, and you can just hit F keys that tell you, okay, I want to launch with Kickstart 1.2, 1.3, or 3.1, or I want to add the action replay freezer and all this kind of stuff. And this is all possible externally. You don't even have to open the machine, and you don't have to exchange a Kickstart ROM or switch a memory expansion on or off. We can even control drives and swap drive numbers and all that kind of stuff. So we can achieve pretty much every configuration, and it is absolutely impossible for the software to tell a difference from that very machine that you want to emulate. So even if you have an Amiga 500 Plus, you can turn that into the very first A500 with Kickstart 1.2, and software won't be able to tell a difference. And this is something that I would always like to implement in future machines. I will definitely not go into developing something C128-like, but if there is an extension to the C64, it'll be switchable, of course, because otherwise I will never be able to reach compatibility to all software that's out there. So, I mean, I know my customers, they want to expand and they want to have a little bit more, and maybe something that would be huge back in the days. But today, there is so much existing software that would have to be patched in order to work on such a beefed-up machine, that you just have to avoid that. You would need an army of programmers to do that. And that's just not available. The beauty of these machines is this vast library of software, and the only way of making that available is to build a compatible machine. So,
may I ask you, what's your opinion about the Amiga 65? Because that's a total different beast, and that's not
that's closer to the FPGA model of the Reloaded, because they're doing it. It's all FPGA based.
Yeah, but it's meant to make a Commodore 65 complete, and there's not really a software library for that machine, actually.
Right. Back in the days when the C65 was planned, it was already trying to compete with the Amiga. I think the Amiga was already up there, and the very reason why the C65 was canceled was that Commodore didn't want in-house competition. They just wanted C64 customers, or customers that would buy a C64 at one point, would switch to an Amiga, and they didn't want to give them too many options, because they have learned fact that once you reach a critical mass of machines in the market, you also attract commercial developers. And once you have enough commercial developers, you have enough applications to really say, okay, this is a killer application and this is a seller for my machine. So having in-house competition is not a good idea. And so I believe the C65 would have probably failed even worse than the C128 because of its lack of software. But from today's point of view, this is truly a nice collector's item. The C65 has always been a very expensive collector's item, and this recreation is really like kind of a Back to the Future movie situation where you go back in time and create a different fork of reality by further developing this machine. The only practical use for it would probably be the C64 mode, which we would maybe be able to improve upon. There have been some requests, and I even talked to the C65 or Mega 65 people. We haven't come to any conclusion yet, but I really consider it a nice project, but not exactly the approach that I would go for making new Commodore hardware.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's a fair opinion. Well, I mean, in the end, we will have to see which of the many products aimed for next year will gain the most hearts. But definitely, I want to be among those getting a Commodore C64 Reloaded Mark II. That's really sounding good to me. So are the cases also planned for January, or are you still planning to get the cases out before Christmas? Because we mostly spoke about the Reloaded itself.
Yeah, the cases for Christmas, this is getting more and more unlikely because there has been one more repair to the top mold of the cases. Like I said, there were a number of repairs, and one of them is the power indicator, where the power LED comes in. There was slight damage. I think this damage has been in some of the cases from Dallas Moore as well, because we see that repair has been done there, but it hasn't been done really professional. It has been done in a way that the LED opening is still there, but the P from power isn't completely readable, and therefore I think this needs repair.
Didn't really look so close to the P, I have to say.
I can send you a picture of of these last two damages that we have. One of them will not be repaired, and the other one, the P from power, this one is currently in repair. Well, the big question mark we have now is this repair going to be finished in time before Christmas, which is very likely. But the next question is, do we get any time on the injection mold machine? And that's highly questionable because shortly before Christmas, there's always some extra business for these service companies, and it's going to be hard to get this one out before Christmas. Maybe samples for journalists, but because you might have seen that the German national TV ZDF they had a few cases.
Yes, I know. I mean, I was actually
right. Yeah,
triggering
you've been
them.
in that interview. Sorry, right? Yeah.
I'm the reason they spoke to you, because I was meeting up with that guy in the National Film Museum in Frankfurt, and I was talking to him, and I was telling him, well, the news on the television, they're always talking negative about the retro hobbies and all are nerds and unsocial and stuff. And I was actually suggesting him this topic, so I'm the reason.
Yeah,
they
thanks a lot for
approached
that.
you,
Yeah,
actually.
thanks. Okay, yeah, but well, maybe not all the listeners of this podcast knew about this. Maybe you could also link into the Mediathek. Although that article that they made was primarily about the retro console by Nintendo, but well, a little bit of C64 is also a topic in that one. So maybe you could link to that too.
Oh yes,
Absolutely.
we mentioned it a couple of times in our podcast actually, because we always link some news and what's happening around the world.
Yeah. Okay. Now
So,
it's out. I'm not a frequent listener, but yeah, maybe I should.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, you're right. Well, the thing was to make a news article and a bit for television that would gain broad interest, and the most broad interest would be NES, and then the Commodore came after that. This is the reason how it came along.
Okay.
They were actually saying Nintendo would be like the most recognizable for nowadays generation. So this is why Nintendo came first, and then came Commodore. So that is the reason why.
Okay. Yeah,
Right.
well, I'm not sure whether we can turn this around. I mean, I already mentioned that during the first part of, maybe 2000, 2001, when the Amiga was still big, there were many people who have criticized me, saying that the Amiga belongs into a retro group, the Amiga is kind of a retro computer. I've been criticized for that earlier, like 16 years ago, and today I think all this fighting, especially between these blue versus red PPC thing inside of the Amiga community. It wasn't really a community back then, but this is over, and there is a new kind of Amiga community, very similar to the existing C64 community, very friendly, very creative people. And this is really starting to be much more fun, and that's the kind of hobby I want to see. I don't want to see so much fighting as we had in the early years of this millennium, especially in the PPC around PPC topics for the Amiga.
Yeah, right.
And so both is really fun, and both is Commodore related, and the Commodore name above all this is really the icing on the cake for me. You can imagine that smile that I had on my face ever since I signed the contract, and of course it's a bit annoying that I can't provide a product in time for Christmas, but I'm pretty sure there are a few more Christmas coming where I can provide products, and I hope the C64 Reloaded and the new concepts will bring new glory to the Commodore name.
Great. So where can people find out about all this, actually?
Of course, my website says it all. Not very much at the moment because I'm only putting out news when I really have to say something. And just go to icomp.de, icomp.de. Those who don't speak German, just click on English, and you can look at the news. You can subscribe to the RSS news feed. Or if you are interested in a specific product, which is already announced but not yet available, you just register on the site, log in, and if you click on any product in the shop page, a user that is logged in will see an additional box that you can tick, notify me about stock changes and product-specific news. So there's a few levels of information that you can get by just either browsing the site or requesting push news about certain products. I try not to pester people with lots and lots of emails every week, but only when I really have something to say. And I hope that's not too scarce, not too much radio silence, but there's a lot going on in the background, and I like to present results and not announcements.
I remember when I got my C64 Reloaded, I got that email at 1:30 on Friday night. And I was like, okay, Jens is selling off the last ones of the limited run at night. So that was really interesting.
I don't even remember that one, but yeah, at times it's you get a totally different sleep schedule once you have family, and if you then if you find the time between certain things, you don't really care what time it is. But if it's like, yeah, I'm awake, the kids are asleep, and there is work to do. Okay, don't care about the time.
Yeah.
But this is also something that I try to get into the spirit of my product. Like I said in the very beginning, the frustration level of a computer can be very high if you don't get to a success within a certain amount of time. And being a parent, I know that spare time can be very limited, and you don't want to spend your spare time setting up and configuring a complicated machine and reading lots and lots of documentation, but you just want to fire it up and do stuff and really get to a point where you say, okay, this is a successful thing, this was fun. And I define this time span, this limited spare time that people of our age probably have, as the time between taking the kids to bed and going to bed yourself.
Okay.
And that makes probably sense. That's probably just 90 minutes in an evening or something. And then, of course, the wife also needs some time. So frustration level must be kept really low. And although there may be very complicated topics around computer hardware or computers in general, I think the main task of a developer, be it hardware or software developer, is to make things easy and to lead people to success in not too long time.
Great.
Nice.
Thanks for taking the time, Jens. Was good talking to you again.
Thanks for the call, and send me a link to the final thing, and I will try to find that TED talk with the music educational thing where they introduce with this. I've written that down, and I hope I can find that within not too long time.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Jens.
Yes, thank you much.
Okay, thanks for your call.
Yeah, you
Have
too.
A nice evening.
Bye.
Okay. So that was Jens Schoenfeld from Individual Computers. You can find out more about what they do on the website. It's icomp.de. That's ICOMP.de. There you can find stuff about the 64 Reloaded and the Chameleon cartridge and the new cases that'll be coming out and the plethora of other stuff that they make. You know, there's an adapter that lets you use a PS2 mouse with your 64 instead of a 1351, which I purchased 2 days before I found an actual 1351. So I've got options now.
Never too bad. No,
I've got options now, you know.
Great.
So, yeah. You know where to find us. It's sceneworld.org, youtube.sceneworld.org, all those things. I'm not going to list them all in this because there's too many. They're in the description below. Click on them, check them out, read issues. New issues should be coming out soon. Maybe by the time you hear this, maybe not. I don't really have any idea.
Yes, but we try to do it within December.
Yes.
Gary is actually in the final steps of putting it together.
Yeah.
Go, Gary, go.
Yeah. So
you are great.
Yep. Until next time, have some good holidays, a good new year. We will see you in 2017.
Yeah, see ya. Bye-bye.